where does the money come to make it up? Are we legally required to increase the rate, or are we gonna have to make, use the taxpayers to fund the deficit? I don't know the answer to that.
City manager has
Well, it could easily become what they refer to as a doom loop, because what happens is we wouldn't have the money to put into the maintenance and the upkeep of the downtown and the parking structures to the extent necessary, which could work to the detriment of the downtown businesses even more so than free parking at the Colony Mill. So it is a delicate balance. I hope, based on the conversations we've had with the people, the new owners of the center of Keene and the Colony Mill, that they're not trying to raid the downtown, and that they recognize that there's a symbiotic relationship between the two entities, and that there will be a connection through Gilboa Avenue that might actually even create a downtown avenue to those locations. So getting to your point, if you don't spend the money on the infrastructure now, it's got to come from someplace or it deteriorates. If it goes on the property tax rate, it means there's less money to spend for other things because there's only so much money that can come from the property taxes. The state is heavily dependent on property taxes. People don't like to pay them, they're very upset, and we know that, and we try to keep them at a minimum. That's why we have user fees.
Okay, just for clarification, we're discussing this. This is an informational report, and at most, all that we're going to accomplish this evening would be to direct staff to prepare an ordinance, and then we'll have the real discussion about tweaking it for how much and for what. This is an open discussion for the public, so if you would like to join in, please introduce yourself once again.
John Mirza. Looking at your figures here, I wonder if you know that from 2008 to 2013, cost of living has gone up 6%. Okay, I looked at the numbers this morning. Your expenses here have gone up 26%, from 767 to 967 over that same time period, 6% versus 26%. Right? Our superintendent of schools recently told us we have a decreasing tax base. We're also losing children in the schools over time, so I assume the population is going down. So here you have expenses going up at 26%, right? And your cost of living 6% and a decreasing population. Right? This doesn't make sense. It's the expenses that are the problem. And what Mr. Thornton said about, the fluctuation, those were small numbers, 70,000, 20,000, this is a $200,000 difference. Okay? So the problem here isn't, as Mr. Filiol was pointing out, it is in the expenses, it's not in the revenues. And as Mr. Duffy pointed out, this is a tax. This is a tax on workers. It's a tax on people who go to the stores, right? It's a reason they don't go to the store. Right? It's so I think it's a very bad idea to up the tickets, to up the. You also might think of this. You might have seen your finance people. You might have seen like Ben Bernanke. He talks about trying to keep inflation up these days, right? No longer inflation is a problem. They try to keep it up, right? There are deflationary forces here. And government doesn't seem to get it, that they shouldn't be charging more and more each year. We have a school board, 6% over 5 years. They want to raise, if they got everything they wanted, they were going to get 6% this year. Right? There's a problem in Keene. The taxes are too high. The school taxes are high. They admit it's high. Right? The taxes are too high here too. And this is a tax. This is more money you're trying to squeeze out of the public. Right? You shouldn't be doing this. This is the wrong thing to do. Right.
Just for clarification, I had asked the question early on about that capital expenditure line, and the answer was it's keyed into repair projects.
Right, but the projects he talked about were small numbers. They didn't even make close to that 200,000. It was 20,000 one year, going out to 2007. They were 70,000 another year, and they went up and down. But here you have a steady increase over 5 years from 767 to 967. That's 26%, with decreasing population and only 6% inflation. Well, it's crazy. This is just government being greedy for revenue, and this is something we can't do if we want to sustain the community. whether it's the school or whether it's the city. We gotta take less, all right? There's a problem, you're either hiring too many people, or you're paying them too much, you're giving them too big raises because the public at large is not getting those raises. Okay? And you have to help the community. You just can't, you gotta hold the government's appetites down.
Thank you. Other public comments, questions? Committee? Yes, sir.
Sure, I have a question for the director, the chairman of the parking commission. I noticed that there was also an idea attached. Oh, Garrett Ian, Leverett Street. I noticed that there was also a proposal attached to this parking rate increase, and I would speak against any increases, especially the drastic increase of the long-term lots as opposed to the short-term lots. But one of the things I found most concerning was a proposal that only quarters would be able to be used in the meters. Now, I wonder why only one particular type of coin would be selected, especially considering that if you look at the rate increases, they're all divisible by nickels. If it was 25 cents gets you 30 minutes, a nickel would get you 6 minutes. If 25 cents got you 20 minutes, a nickel would get you 4 minutes. So I don't see why there would be an intentional push to make it difficult for the people to be able to purchase time by only having one type of coin that they can use. It seems to me to be a deliberate attempt to make it more difficult for people to pay their meters, and so that they're less likely to pay, so they're more likely to get tickets. It requires you to carry quarters. I can't think of any business that tells you have to pay in a particular type of denomination. That seems ridiculous. Even soda machines have change slots on them, so you can pay in $1 if it's only 75 cents. So I would strongly urge and say that the people are definitely against the idea that you would have to pay in quarters. Robin Hood of Keene and the Merry People would still be able to take care of everyone and pay with quarters, and we'd see about distributing more quarters to more people. But I don't see why this wouldn't affect Robin Hood, but it definitely would affect the people, so I would stand against this move to make it so you have to spend a quarter in order to buy time on a meter.
Thank you.
So I'd like to clear that up. The intent of changing over is that we were going to do a minimum of 25 cents. It does not mean that we can't put nickels and dimes in. It just means that it would be a 25-cent minimum charge.
Thank you. Any other questions, comments from public?
Oh, about that minimum charge. So if you had a dime, you could...
Yes, I recognize you.
Okay. So if you put a dime in, I guess that would mean that you'd have to put 3 dimes in before any time would register?
Correct. That's a recommendation that you can put 2 dimes in a nickel and then get your 25 cents, and that's when it registers. That's correct.
Interesting.
Yes.
Good evening, James Cleveland, 173 Washington Street. I'd like to start off talking, I agree with Mr. Duffy. I think the most egregious thing about this whole proposal is the increase on the off-street parking. Just for comparison, the uncovered and the covered lots, they'll go up about 12% if you average the two. And if you broke that out over 13 years, that'd be a 1% increase a year. So even if you had increased it yearly. Now, for comparison, the on-street parking will go up 50%. So if you broke that out over 13 years, that'd be 4% a year. Now, the real problem, as I see it, is the off-street parking. So basically, the rate will go up 200%. And if you broke that out over 13 years, that'd be a 15% increase per year. And I agree with Mr. Duffy that a lot of employees will be harmed by this increase. You know, there's people that work downtown, and those are the people who use that parking. Another thing I'd like to address, the 25-cent minimum requirement. So I think it's going to lead to frustration if you require 25 cents. So suppose someone wants to eat at Lindy's Diner and they only have 2 dimes. You know, they may get frustrated. They may think the meter's broken. They may put a nickel in and, oh, the meter's not working, so I'm not going to pay for it. Or I need to go get change from a business, so now I need to take the risk that I could get ticketed. So I think that that's a terrible idea, and it's going to lead to frustration from people. I don't see why. I mean, even if you do want to increase it, why would you want a minimum? Someone may want to park in Gilbo, run down to Corner News and grab a snack. They don't want to buy 25 cents worth of parking. So I feel like you're limiting choice in that scenario, and you're also limiting the ability, it's harder for people to pay and be in compliance with the ordinance. One thing I was curious about, the on-street rates, maybe that's more reasonable as I mentioned, but to Mr. Randy's point, and I'm sorry I can't pronounce your last name, but I think it would have an impact on the downtown businesses. I thought that was a great point that he made, that the center of Keene, is up and coming. There's a plan. There's an investor who wants to turn that property around, and it is going to compete with the downtown. And I guess to Mr. Mirzoff's point, I agree with him. There's not a problem with the revenue, it's a problem with cost. He mentioned there's a 26% increase over 6 years. Well, in the projected numbers, there's a 16% increase. So I mean, that's a big number each year. It just keeps going up. One thing I was curious about, maybe you guys can comment, how did you guys figure the new revenue numbers? How did you arrive at that figure at the bottom?
Mr. Broughton.
Like you're talking about meter revenue
Correct. And the other one.
and the other one? Okay, well, the meter revenue is we have a certain number of on-street spaces and a certain number of off-street spaces. And it's about 2/3 to 1/3. And so we looked at our meter revenue, said, this is the allocation. This is the allocation between the two. Here are the costs to the cost that the parking people had suggested. Well, we've got a few different scenarios. It just ran those numbers and projected the increase based on an average, sort of a weighted average of the last 4 years of what those revenues have been.
Now, one thing I would caution, I think, and maybe it's debatable whether this would happen, if you don't factor in maybe even a slight decrease in demand from the increased rates.
We did that,
Okay.
yeah.
I guess some other questions I had. What is the major driver of this increase in cost? I mean, what makes it keep going up year after year after year?
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, okay, well, so we've got operating and capital rolled it into one here, which, at the time, we were trying for simplicity, but maybe that wasn't a good idea. In looking at our operating costs, which are our parking enforcement and maintenance, our expenditures were $716,000 in 2008, and $805,000 in 2013. So there has been an increase in operating costs, but it's not that.
Could you read those numbers to me again?
715 in 2008,
And that's the operational cost?
operational costs, and 805 in 2013, and then there are ups and downs in the years in between. So it's gone up. What we do have is we've got increased capital costs. We in 2008 we put aside $5,000 a year for each of our parking decks. We now put aside $25,000 for each of our parking decks for larger repairs. And that may or may not be enough in the long run. The repairs to those facilities are expensive. We've also started some ad hoc repairs to the parking decks and also increases in the lot. So in the years we're looking at are, what we had for our maintenance expenses were $51,006 in 2008, and then they changed, $30,000 in 2009, $98,000 in 2010, and then we've got $162 in 2013. So, you know, a lot of our growth, the big bump up in that numbers is trying to get a handle on the maintenance and preserving our infrastructure. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so what percent is operations versus maintenance?
Well, I'm not very good at throwing those numbers right out. Let's say this, 161 in 2013 for the, big maintenance, and 805 for our operations, which is, routine maintenance like snow plowing. And if you've got the calculator, maybe you can.
So it's like 20%.
Well, instead of,
In that year it was 20%. In any given year,
Okay.
it's not 20%.
instead of trying to do this
Right.
on the fly like
Right.
this is the only one who could do that. The number man. I think it would be appropriate as we move forward, if you could break that out.
Sure.
Because I think that was my question early, it was the gentleman over there,
still-
that was your question.
It's still
about this.
13% on operations,
Okay.
okay? And so it's still way more than 6%
Okay.
in a declining
These costs do not
environment.
track CPI, and that's unfortunately a misnomer that many people have. They track the cost of energy, and the equipment replacement, and equipment rates, as well as costs that get passed along relative to personnel, et cetera, by outside influences, for example, the state of New Hampshire retirement fund. So these costs can go up in manners that do not have any similarity to the CPI at all. I know that the average property taxpayer doesn't understand that. I don't know why they would. They look at their own expenses, they go to the grocery store, et cetera, they go to the gas pump, and they see the various costs that are being passed along to them. The city of Keene has other expenses, energy being primary, and employees being another, as well as the fact that these are aging infrastructure. As you can look at these parking decks, they're no longer brand new. The one behind City Hall had to have the deck replaced every couple of years now,